IT Thessaloniki would like to present you the work we have done on accessibility of sport organization in online environment, implemented within the Erasmus Plus project Good Governance in Sport. First, we will introduce you to the web accessibility topic. We will talk about the disabilities and the applicable legislation. We will talk about evaluating accessibility, and last, we will provide a hands-on approach on the topic. We begin with the introduction. Tim Berners-Lee, the W3C director and inventor of the World Wide Web, has addressed the issue of accessibility. To be more exact, he claimed that the power of the web is in its universality and that access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. Web accessibility is a term with many definitions. According to Brian Siakowski, web accessibility is the ability for a person to understand and fully interact with a website's content using any user agent like a software or hardware that retrieves and renders web content. However, the majority of the definitions do not include the ability to contribute as part of web accessibility, and also many authors seem to ignore the fact that web accessibility also benefits people without disabilities, like for example people with temporary disabilities, situational limitations, or even people using a slow internet connection. In this slide, you can see an effort to illustrate a unified definition of web accessibility by Helen Petrie, Andrea Sava, and Christopher Power, presented in the 12th Web for All conference in 2015. In their work, the pre-mentioned writers claim that all people, particularly disabled and older people, can use websites in a range of contexts of use, including mainstream and assistive technologies. But to achieve this, websites need to be designed and developed to support usability across these contexts. Even superheroes face problems regarding web accessibility. A few perspectives on making the web more accessible is using compatible keyboards, converting text to speech, designing large links, buttons, and controls, or using voice recognition applications, which are nowadays available. In the effort to ensure that technology is accessible, we note two components: training the human to accommodate the needs of the technology, and designing the technology to meet the needs of the human. The truth is we have focused largely on the ergonomic problems of users, sometimes ignoring possible software cognitive problems. For example, think of a user who must operate a keyboard with a pointer held in his mouth. Such kind of users surely benefit from a specially designed keyboard layout, or a well-shaped pointer, or a comfortable physical environment, but if the software requires more keystrokes than absolutely necessary, then we're not delivering an optimal interface for that user. In order to optimize the web accessibility, developers use authoring and evaluation tools to develop content in such a way so that it is user-friendly through special browsers, media players, and various assistive technologies. Nowadays, there are specific accessibility guidelines and technical specifications regarding web accessibility. Accessibility, usability, and inclusion are closely related aspects in creating a web that works for everyone, since their goals, approaches, and guidelines overlap significantly. Thus, the most effective approach is to address them together when designing and developing websites and applications. Let's clarify the terms usability and inclusion a bit further. Usability is about designing products to be effective, efficient, and satisfying, and includes user experience design. This may include general aspects that impact everyone and do not disproportionately impact people with disabilities. Unfortunately, Practice and research on this topic often does not sufficiently address the needs of people with disabilities. Inclusion, on the other hand, is about diversity and ensuring involvement of everyone to the greatest extent possible. In some regions, this is also referred to as universal design and design for all. It addresses a broad range of issues, including accessibility for people with disabilities, access to and quality of hardware, software, and internet connectivity, computer literacy and skills, economic situation, education, geographic location, culture, age, and language. Here we can see a diagrammatic explanation of the terms accessibility and usability, pointing out that the user experience consists of both accessibility and usability factors. The main international standards organization for the Internet, the World Wide Web Consortium, and more specifically its Web Accessibility Initiative, has published a series of web accessibility guidelines named Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are a set of recommendations for making web content more accessible, primarily for people with disabilities, but also for all user agents, including highly limited devices such as mobile phones. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines suggest that for content to be perceivable, one should provide text alternatives for non-text content, should provide captions and other alternatives for multimedia. One should create content that can be presented in different ways, including by assistive technologies, without losing meaning, and it should be made easier for users to see and hear content. Moreover, in order to ensure operability of content, we should make all functionality available from a keyboard, give users enough time to read and use content, not use content that causes seizures or physical reactions, help users navigate and find content, and make it easier to use inputs other than keyboard. It is also important to make content understandable by making text readable and making content appear and operate in predictable ways in order to help users avoid and correct mistakes. Last but not least, according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, content should be robust, which can be accomplished by maximizing compatibility with current and future user tools. We continue with the section regarding disabilities. Kent Callers, an astronomer, talking about his blindness, claimed that it isn't a disability for him, but it is more of an annoyance. Some examples of visual impairments are low vision, color vision deficiency, or even blindness. In this slide, we can see a few statistics about blindness and low vision provided by the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness. In a world population of 7.3 billion, 253 million people are visually impaired, of whom 55% are women and 89% live in low and middle-income countries. It is also remarkable that 1.1 billion people have near vision impairment simply because they do not have a pair of spectacles. According to the American Academy of Ophthalmology, low vision is defined as a vision loss that cannot be corrected by medical or surgical treatments or conventional eyeglasses, and the person with low vision must learn to adjust to it. Low vision should not be confused with blindness. People with low vision still have useful vision that can often be improved with visual devices. Color vision deficiencies are classified in anomalous trichromatism, dichromatism, and monochromatism. Anomalous trichromatism occurs when one of the fundamental cones has its peak sensitivity shifted. Dichromatism is a more severe form that results when one of the fundamental cones is missing. And monochromatism is the most severe form of color vision deficiencies and is characterized by a total inability to distinguish colors. This image displays the differences between the trichromatic vision and the color vision impairment referred to as deuteranopia. There is a huge list of cognitive and learning impairments. For example, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum disorder, intellectual, learning, mental health or perceptual disabilities, memory impairments, multiple sclerosis, neurodiversity, and seizure disorders. Let's pass on to hearing impairments. The hearing impaired people is a heterogeneous group that includes people with different and individual needs in communication and a varied access to acoustic information. The group is composed of the deaf, the late-deafened people, the hard of hearing, and the people with a cochlear implant. A very useful tool developed among people with hearing impairments is the sign language, which uses combinations of movements of the hands and arms, facial expressions, or body positions to convey meaning.
Physical disabilities, sometimes called motor disabilities, include weakness and limitations of muscular control, limitations of sensation, joint disorders, pain that impedes movement, and missing limbs. In the current slide, we can see some examples of physical impairments. More precisely, repetitive stress injury, quadriplegia, muscular dystrophy, and arthritis. Many older people have age-related impairments that can affect how they use the web. For example, declining vision can make it difficult to read web pages. Declining physical ability can make it difficult to use a mouse and click small targets. Hearing problems could make it difficult to hear podcasts and other audio, especially when there is background music. And problems in cognitive ability could make it difficult to follow navigation and complete online tasks. These issues overlap with the accessibility needs of people with disabilities. Thus, websites, applications, and tools that are accessible to people with disabilities are more accessible to older users as well. We continue our presentation with some information on legislation on our topic. George W. Bush said, "Together we must remove the physical barriers we have created and the social barriers that we have accepted. For ours will never be a truly prosperous nation until all within it prosper." This points out the importance of legislation on accessibility for people with disabilities. In 1990, George W. Bush signed the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was a set of regulations regarding accessibility. Casey Martin is a professional golfer who was born with a birth defect in his right leg and fought for many years for his right to use a golf cart during competition. The Casey Martin syndrome is a term that may be applied to lawsuits charging ADA discrimination based on the inaccessibility of critical information. This term was coined by Mike Pacello, an accessibility caretaker and mentor. In June 2011, the National Association of the Deaf filed suit against Netflix, citing their lack of closed captioning for streaming video as a violation of the ADA. Netflix offers mail-order DVDs, which abide by FCC closed captioning rules, but its Watch Instantly online streaming service was not captioned. Since more than half of all Americans watch Netflix, the video streaming service must be made accessible to deaf and hard of hearing viewers. Bobby Beth Scoggins, the National Association of the Deaf president, commented on this NAD versus Netflix case. "We have tried for years to persuade Netflix to do the right thing and provide equal access to all content across all platforms. They chose not to serve our community on an equal basis. We must have equal access to the biggest provider of stream entertainment. As Netflix itself acknowledges, streamed video is the future and we must not be left out.
The ADA Title III specifies that places of public accommodation must be accessible to people with disabilities. Netflix's defense in the NAD lawsuit was that its business cannot be considered a place of public accommodation because it's not a physical place. It argued that the ADA was intended to increase access to physical structures like parks, museums, train stations, theaters, etc. for people with disabilities. Since Netflix streaming video is not a physical product or service, it can't be considered a place and therefore isn't subject to the ADA. The ADA does not mention web services or digital products as being subject to its regulations. Of course, the ADA doesn't specifically mention the Internet because it was passed in 1990, before the Internet was widespread. That doesn't mean that the Internet is exempt from the ADA. It means that we need to redefine what public places are in a digital landscape. So how is streaming video on Netflix considered public? The NAD Council examined Netflix's own advertising to illustrate this. Watch what you want when you want by streaming instantly over the Internet, right on your TV. Through this lens, Netflix delivers more than just the movie itself. It delivers the experience of instant access to the programs you want, streamed over the Internet. Unless that content is captioned, Netflix is not providing an equal experience for deaf and hard of hearing viewers. They get a lesser product than other members of the public. The NAD also brought up the social aspect of Netflix streaming, how a family that cozies up on the couch to watch a movie on Netflix cannot equally include someone who does not hear. In this sense, Netflix is not just a private activity, it's a shared or public activity which makes the ADA applicable. Judge Ponce ruled that it would be rational to conclude that places of public accommodation are limited to actual physical structures. In a society in which business is increasingly conducted online, excluding businesses that sell services through the Internet from the ADA would run afoul of the purpose of the ADA. It would severely frustrate Congress's intent that individuals with disabilities fully enjoy the goods, services, privileges, and advantages available indiscriminately to other members of the general public. In other words, the judge ruled in favor of the NAD's argument that Netflix is subject to the ADA and therefore must provide closed captioning for streaming web video. Netflix was ordered to caption its streaming video library by 2014 and to continue captioning content published thereafter. It also paid the NAD $755,000 for legal fees and damages. Following this lawsuit and its positive ruling, there was a whole contagion of lawsuits. The ADA is a phenomenal law which has opened doors, literally, for persons living with disabilities. Yet there is a relentless group of personal injury lawyers who view the ADA not as a key to access for those with disabilities, but a tool to line their pockets at the expense of well-meaning small businesses. We can see a timeline of the legislation regarding accessibility in the EU, right from the first Minister Agreement in 2003 up to the European Parliament approval of wide rules for web accessibility in 2016. With this regulation, the websites and applications of public administrations, hospitals, courts, and other public sector bodies in the EU have to be made accessible to everyone. Let's go on to some evaluating accessibility tools and methods. Web accessibility evaluation is an assessment of how well the web can be used by people with disabilities. Nowadays, there is a whole bunch of web accessibility evaluation tools enlisted in World Wide Web Organization. Accessibility evaluation methods should have certain qualities, that is, effectiveness, validity, correctness, sensitivity, and reliability. Effectiveness refers to the levels of accuracy and completeness of results achieved. Validity is defined as the extent to which the problems detected during an evaluation are also those that show up during real-world use of the system. Correctness is the percentage of reported problems that are true problems. Sensitivity is the percentage of the true problems that are reported, sometimes called recall or thoroughness, and reliability is the extent to which independent evaluations produce the same results. Web accessibility evaluation methods include conformance reviews, screening techniques, subjective assessments, user testing, and barrier walkthrough. A conformance review as an evaluation method is relatively cost-effective, and it can identify a rather large range of diverse problems for a diverse audience, and also the defects underlying the checkpoint violations. On the other hand, it requires skillful evaluators, and it's not likely to distinguish reliably between important and non-important accessibility problems. Screening techniques are easy to use, they're very cheap, and they can achieve good levels of sensitivity, but they are very unsystematic. Subjective assessments can be a very helpful evaluation method as well. Since they are low cost, they can be performed remotely in space and time, and they report very different things about the same page, depending on different users with different experience and different attitudes. On the other hand, participants are able to explore the areas of the website that most suit them, which is likely to increase their motivation in using it. And as a method, it is not very systematic, both regarding the pages being tested and the criteria used to evaluate them. Last, user testing is a method that accurately identifies usability problems, usually experienced by real users with catastrophic consequences. However, this method has many disadvantages as well. It is not very efficient, it will probably not identify low-severity problems, it is rather complicated to set up a user testing session with disabled participants in order to acquire appropriate results, and it is crucial for the facilitators to be experienced, since an inexperienced test facilitator could even invalidate the test. The last part of our presentation is some hands-on examples. One of the easiest checks on a website regarding accessibility is the image text alternatives. Those alternatives convey the purpose of an image and are used by people who do not see the image, for example, for blind people or for people who have turned off the images for various reasons. These alternatives should be sufficiently descriptive. If you can close your eyes, have someone read the text out to you, and imagine a reasonably accurate version of the image, you're on the right track. For example, consider this image. A first text alternative could be pancakes. This text alternative is okay, but it's not very descriptive. Consider another text alternative, stack of blueberry pancakes with powdered sugar. This one is much more descriptive than the previous one. An image text alternative gets better and better the more details we give on the image. For example, this image here is not just a rooster, it's not just a rooster crowing. Even better, it's a red-crested rooster crowing. Headings are very important on a website. They communicate the organization of the content of the page, and web browsers, plugins, and assistive technologies can use them to provide in-page navigation. Web pages often have sections of information separated by visual headings. For example, heading text is bigger in bold. To make these work for everyone, the headings need to be marked up. That way, people can navigate to the headings, including people who cannot use a mouse and use only the keyboard, and people who use a screen reader. Heading levels should have a meaningful hierarchy. Another parameter we should pay attention to is the visual comfort, which is defined as the ease with which the information can be read from the screen. A measurement unit of the visual comfort is the luminance contrast ratio, which can be computed by use of the Weber-Fechner's law formula. An even more appropriate indicator of the sensations that the subject feels and the physical luminance is this ratio used to compute the difference in the sensation a subject perceives from the foreground color and the background color. Color contrast refers to how bright or dark colors appear against each other on screens, particularly with regard to the relative grayscale luminosity as perceived by the human eye. When it comes to website accessibility, the contrast between the text and the text background is a concern for colorblind and other visually impaired users. Nowadays, there are available color contrast accessibility validators that comply to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. In this slide, we can see the results of such a validator on the FIBA, the International Basketball Federation website. The results appear as comments and recommendations at the bottom of the screen. Finally, resizing text can be an issue, since some people need to enlarge web content in order to read it. Some need to change other aspects of text display, like font, space between lines, and more. Most browsers allow users to change text through text size settings, text-only zoom, or page zoom. When pages are not designed properly, they can be unusable when text size is changed, especially when it is changed through text-only zoom or text settings. Sometimes columns and sections overlap, the space between lines disappears, lines of text become too long, or text disappears. When text size is increased, sometimes part of the sentences are not visible and users have to scroll horizontally to read a sentence. Most people cannot effectively read text that requires horizontal scrolling, and some disabilities make this impossible. Our presentation is here concluded. Thank you for your attention.